And good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Open Your Eyes. We're about to venture off into our topics for this morning. As a matter of fact, we're about to venture off into our first segment for this morning. It's actually directors of the Sugar Association of the Caribbean, or SAC, on the future of CARICOM sugar producers. Now in with us this morning, we've got our Carl James, who's the chairman, Jamaica Director of Sugar Association of the Caribbean, or SAC. And also in with us is Mac McLaughlin, who is the Belize Director, Sugar Association of the Caribbean. Guys, good morning. It's so nice to see you. And welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, John.
Thank you for having us.
We read what the producers sent to us. Well, for me at least.
Yes.
I read it over and I said, wow, very, very important.
Yeah.
And when it comes to sugar, we know for a fact that it is one of the most, or if not the most important commodity for flavor, taste, and definitely, we've got one of the finest throughout the Caribbean here in Belize, there in Orange Walk.
Yes.
And, you know, it dawned to me. So we've got our Caribbean directors sitting down and discussing where to go next. Let's start with where are we, or where were we before when it comes to sugar and CARICOM? Then we move on from there.
Chairman.
Well, at one, most of the sugar that was produced in the Caribbean was shipped to England, Tate and Lyle.
Yeah.
Under the EU sugar protocol, all of us had what they call a quota into the European Union. You had a fixed quota, you had a fixed price, and you had a market that was there to take your sugar. So none of us had a problem in getting people to finance us because we delivered. So the largest quota holder was Guyana, then Jamaica, then Trinidad, then Belize, St. Kitts, and Barbados. We are now left with 4 producers: Guyana, Jamaica, Belize, and Barbados. But the largest producer in the Caribbean right now is Belize.
Sweet.
Belize, the largest producer of sugar in the Caribbean.
Okay.
We have come down from over 1 million tons a year production to about 400 because you see, Trinidad dropped out. The first one dropped out. Then St. Kitts, and then there has been a significant reduction in Jamaica, as we are partnering with them for using our land to make houses, build houses. So that's where we were. We are now where this year we're likely to produce about 430,000 tons of sugar among the 4 of us.
Okay.
But we still have the EU market. Most of it goes straight to Tate and Lyle for their refinery. At one time, some of it used to go to Portugal because we also supply Portugal.
Okay.
And then we have the US quota. The US gives us, it's smaller than the British, but right now it's the best export price that we get for the United States. So we have to look at where we are with that. So far, Mac hasn't supplied his yet. But Mac is smart because Mac is waiting for additional reallocation, which we are likely to get to go to the United States. So instead of just sending 12,000 tons, Mac is hoping to send maybe 20, depending on because the American market say they need between 150 and 200,000 tons more this year. So we're waiting to see what happens. So we have UK, not much, really. The price is not good. The US, and then CARICOM. Now this is where we have our challenge, to supply the CARICOM market, because CARICOM consumes about 400,000 tons, but most of that sugar comes in as refined from outside the region. We don't refine any. The best nearest to refine is Belize with plantation white. And so we are fighting, we are negotiating with the Caribbean people to use plantation white and liquid sugar in their production rather than importing from Guatemala, Colombia, Brazil, all over the place.
Yeah.
And this is the big challenge that we have.
And if I can just add, Carl.
Time to get in.
Look, there's a real something's gone wrong, okay, in the CARICOM market. In most regions, particularly in this area of the world, what happens is a sugar producer produces sugar for its own market. That's national or regional, first and foremost. And normally, that is produced into a region where that sugar is protected in some way. That gives a very good basis then for investment, improvements in efficiency, and then whatever the residual amount of sugar left after supplying that local market would then be exported. The export prices that you tend to receive for sugar are the residual of after you've got the sort of local market worked out. And as Carl says, full demand in CARICOM, 350,000 tons, something like that. But more than 2/3 of that demand is being supplied from outside the region without paying the common external tariff, under the idea that the need is for a different type, different quality of sugar than is being produced in the region. The problem is, really, we feel that, and looking at all the other regions in the world, really, what tends to happen is a higher refined version of sugar will cost you more money. In the CARICOM right now, because the prices are very low, it's actually, if you bring it in without paying any duty, it's actually cheaper than the sugar that's being produced in the Caribbean. So we would talk, and we are talking to industrial users about, look, isn't it better to have regional supply for sugar, because sugar is a cyclical commodity. The price goes up, goes down. A few years ago, the price was 3 times what it is today. So we're saying, look, we've got a regional supply of sugar here. It's perfectly usable in the vast majority of products. And Belize is a beautiful example where all products here produced using Belizean sugar. And also it's the same in Brazil, in Mexico, in all these different places. The Caribbean stands out at the moment as a region that's really not giving the kind of support that's needed for its own industries, and the knock-on effect for that is that you're putting your own producers, which look after the livelihoods of up to around 400,000 Caribbean citizens. It's a big deal, and you're putting those livelihoods in jeopardy in order to support imported sugar from outside the region. So we're having a grown-up conversation about that, but what we do need is unfettered support from our governments, from our industries, to match quality, quantity, and a regulatory environment that's going to make that work. And I don't have to tell the two of you that for Belize this is hugely important. Massive contributor to the country's national economy, and that's really what we're talking about in our SAC meetings these days, Carl.
Allow me to step back for a moment, because I think one of the things that we have consistently discussed on this show, and I think throughout the public discourse on this commodity, was preparing for the end of the preferential trade with the European Union. And my question is, I think it seems for so many people to be a no-brainer. If you're looking just proximity, if you're not going to be selling or producing just for Belize, you want to be closer, it's less cost, and because we are a part of the regional integration with the Caribbean countries. What was the discussion as we were preparing for the end of the preferential trade? And why are we now in this position if, I'm assuming, that conversation was initiated before?
Well, Carl.
Okay. One of the things, I've been in the sugar industry before you were born. However, one of the problems we have had is the fact that all this time, most of the sugar that was produced was shipped. So there was not a lot of emphasis placed on the Caribbean market. In the meantime, the whole thing was shifting in the Caribbean, where people were now producing more drinks, and they figured that the ideal product for drinks was refined sugar, since it has no flavor. While you have a nice tasting Belize brown sugar or plantation white. So they developed this approach to using only white sugar. In the meantime, though, we were telling them And we now need to get to where we are supplying the local market, less of the European market. What the protocol ended in 2008. This is now 11 years.
Yeah.
Belize is a good example of having really invested to produce more sugar, different quality sugar, and have an industry that is really well set. The rest of us have not done that. And it all depends on the approach of the mill owners. What do do they invest to improve the quality, to expand, or do they're satisfied with sending the sugar in the bottom of a ship? Somebody does the value added, and you get back refined sugar.
We'll be sending out a release about our meeting yesterday, and
Right.
one of the key points that is taking place in the industry today is massive investment, particularly in Belize, but also in Guyana, to produce, we would say within the next 12 to 18 months, probably 280,000 tons of food-grade sugar, be that white, brown, whatever you like.
Yes.
And that is basically the CARICOM market. So I think the question of is a good one, what happened in the past. We have to overcome a history where, as Carl says, a lot of sugar was exported and maybe the domestic market in the CARICOM was neglected. That's a thing of the past from October 2017 when the preference in pricing disappeared in Europe. It is what it is. The investment going into Belize right now, even from our mill, 30 million US over a period of 4 or 5 years. Of course, we have the Santander Sugar Corporation that's also invested heavily in the sugar industry. Guyana is looking at this year moving to be able to produce 50,000 tons of white sugar. So I think we're speaking with our investment.
Yeah.
What we now need is for the market to reflect that through the regulation and the way the regulations work. There are various anomalies in that.
Let me stick a pin there, because that's exactly where I am. I think for any person who's been paying attention to the conversation that has taken place about CARICOM and moving towards a single market and economy, it's always been, and I guess perhaps taken for granted, that we saw the Caribbean countries as an extension of what should be a Belize market.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
I'm having a lot of difficulty understanding why we are unable to get our sugar into the Caribbean when this has been the essence of what we've talked about with integration.
Yeah.
So can you clearly define for me what is the challenge and how do we overcome it?
Yeah, I can. It's very straightforward, extremely straightforward. Yes, to your point, the CARICOM single market should be the market into which regional sugar comes. It's called regional integration of the sugar industry and market, and that's what we're talking about. The reason that's not happening is because under treaty rules in CARICOM, there are certain suspension and waiver systems that permit the importation of extra-regional sugar duty-free, because all at this point, really all an industrial user of sugar has to say is, well, I need a different type of sugar.
Yeah.
It might be white, it might be green, it might be whatever, but we just need a different type of sugar and you can't do it, so I can bring it in duty-free. Now, the key issue here, the main driving force behind this is price, because believe me, at a time where the global prices were higher, and they will become higher again, obviously, CARICOM sugar becomes more attractive again. And that's the time where you see the market shake down and you actually see exactly who needs to use what in their products. But what we're doing is we're identifying this anomaly in the system by directly demonstrating examples to the CARICOM Secretariat. One recent example was an importer bringing in, asking for a waiver for 45,000 metric tons of sugar. Now, we can all visualize a 1 pound bag of sugar.
Yeah.
You try visualizing 45,000 metric tons, that's three times the annual demand in Belize in one waiver request. Now, and that sugar, what's happening to that massive mountain of sugar? That's then being diverted across into the CARICOM for all kinds of different uses. And that system is being tolerated under the single market rules. Now, Minister Hulse here, Jamaican Agriculture Minister, have all said the same thing. If the single market won't work for sugar, it won't work for anything.
Yeah.
And we're at a point where I think that's one side of the argument. That's the regulatory side of the argument. We also have a responsibility to talk and be in partnership with industrial users of sugar to make sure that the product that's going to come
That you're
out,
creating what they need.
yeah. And also in a pricing environment, long-term pricing environment that makes sense for them, and we can do that, and we are doing that, having that discussion. But we need to get over this hurdle of preventing this automatic waiver suspension system from kicking in, when in fact there's plenty of food-grade, excellent quality sugar in the CARICOM to be utilised in Caribbean products. So one example of that is we're issuing a report that has been written about the use of food grade, plantation white, other types of sugar in all industrial processes, and that's what happens in Mexico, happens in Colombia, it happens all over the world. For CARICOM and the industrial users of sugar to say they can't use it is, why not? So we're issuing a report demonstrating that, and also demonstrating the economic benefit of long-term supply, regional supply. If somebody needs a different quality sugar, a lower color or whatever, that's perfectly feasible to do. And you do that through creating liquid sugar plants or things like that. So there's a lot of ways to overcome any genuine obstacles, but that's the path we're on right now.
We have a problem though with what they call the porousness of the border. I was in Washington last week. You can't send a ton of sugar into the United States except it's within your quota. Any above that, they confiscate it at the port and you have to deliver it elsewhere. The same thing happens in Europe. Guys have tried to ship sugar illegally from here to Europe, and they watch the ship all the way up and send it up to the Baltic to discharge. It can't go into Europe because there's a high tariff to protect it. Every sugar producing area in the world has a protection, but we can't say we don't have a protection. What we don't have is an application of the protection. 40% CET on the sugar. We are saying no, 40% must be applied, and MAC is saying we should apply it to all sugars coming in, but apply it. It doesn't make sense that you send a request to take to CARICOM and need 150 tons of 1,500 tons of sugar.
And the application is for security purpose.
The application is for security. In other words, it goes and the CARICOM must approve that you can bring it in. But the guys now just maybe
have a
send
waiver.
it out. They got a waiver.
It's a rubber stamp.
But I mean, clearly, when there was the time that the preference of the sugar producers was to send it to a better market, which was Europe, there was a need for the sugar to be imported from outside of the region. And that's what I'm assuming took place. But since that change, you're saying that the waiver continues to be applied for sugar coming out of the Caribbean. And it's even in terms of proximity, you're talking Guatemala, which is right next to us, being able to produce the sugar and ship it out to the Caribbean.
Guatemala is the main exporter of sugar into the Caribbean. Guatemala and Colombia. Now, one important point there is if you are in Guatemala buying sugar, you'd be buying it at more than twice the price that they're selling sugar into the CARICOM. Wow. So when I talk about utilize your domestic market. So
how is there the reduction in what is the discrepancy in the pricing there?
Well, because
they don't pay the tariff?
No, because they're controlling their own market. Okay, so that there's a higher price there, and the CARICOM isn't. Simple. That's in someone's language dumping. But what we want to do is get to a win-win situation with industrial users, demonstrating how not only that you can use sugar. That's not the point. The point here is, does the single market work or not? And the secondary point to all of this is, it's worthwhile having agricultural industries in the Caribbean.
Value added.
You know, most national economies, it's in their better interest to have diversified economies.
Of course.
You know, those countries, Carl listed a number of them who went out of sugar completely and now are more reliant on fewer income streams,
tourism.
are in a weaker position. Yeah. We in Belize, thankfully, and you know, to your point, Marlene, we have, from BSI, have always supplied all the sugar for Belize. There's never been a question of, this or that. You know, and people have adapted to that.
Yeah.
And it works. So again, to the argument, you can't use your sugar. Well, actually, you can.
There's a new reality that has come up. Mark referred to the business of paying for sugar. Our biggest oil producer, biggest market, has had problems finding dollars, US dollars, to pay for sugar. We are saying to them, let us come to an agreement. We will supply all the sugar you want. We will also have the flexibility of delivering to you as you need it. But we are trying to find out from the central banks how we can have a system where Trinidad will pay Belize in Belizean dollars, and then you have a clearing mechanism to get your US dollars. Because Trinidad has problems to pay for sugar and they're the biggest importer in US. Barbados has challenges finding US dollars. So there are many reasons, and there is a phrase that has been used in this sugar discussion. It's called multifunctionality. In other words, a sugar industry. You don't plant any cane in Belize City. Where you plant the cane? In the rural area. So the cane, you provide rural employment. You also have the sugar cane creating a lot, creating a lot of opportunity for climate, to help climate change. It's a rural thing, it's renewable every year. You keep planting, it takes CO2 out of it's an excellent product, and then a lot of other industries. We were discussing the fact that you have a big transport industry, you have the artisans who develop. The sugar industry is what one of my ministers declared the most democratic economic activity in anywhere you put it. Everybody shares in it. And our problem really is to get CARICOM to implement the protection across the board. Don't let in anything. Allow us also to work with the sugar users, manufacturers, and see how what they want. We can accommodate, provide it, and then I was saying to you a while ago, the whole business of paying for the sugar. All those things in a real integrated industry that benefits everybody.
And I think it's one important point here. This isn't really an ask. This is the single market.
This is what's set out in the treaty.
Yes, this is a right. So there are legal recourse to take forward in this area to underpin the questions that we're having and that we're asking. But at the end of the day, you know,
that's not your preferred route.
Well, I mean, our preferred route is to get to the end of the road where we are producing 450,000 tons of sugar a year. The market is 350,000 tons a year, and yet we're having to export a vast majority of our sugar out of this region. That does not make sense. It doesn't make sense for CARICOM, and it doesn't make sense for neither the industrial users or sugar producers.
But one of the things that I'm hearing, especially in the start of the conversation, is we had a certain amount being produced at first, and then we're seeing a reduction in that production. And then we had a number of Caribbean nations actually producing, and now we've got 4. And then we're seeing one of those 4 who are actually having less in terms of production. Why do you guys have conversations and you have your meetings What is being said to try and quell that situation, which of course will eventually bring up the economy in these various countries? What's the conversation there?
I mean, the core thing really is that, that there needs to be a market to sell that sugar. Otherwise, who's going to make the investment? If there's not going to be a realistic opportunity for a return on that investment. So what we're saying is, we want to correct all these issues. And incidentally, I mean, in recent history, and I'm talking since many years now, we've been producing 400,000-500,000 tons consistently across the region. So there's plenty of supply.
There's sufficient supply.
There's sufficient,
for the region.
and there will always be sufficient
is.
supply.
There is.
But to answer your question, this is what the CET is all about. It's not about a subsidy. It's not about it's kind of rewarding somebody in some way against somebody else. That's not what it's about. It's about encouraging the right investment climate for countries who perhaps need that extra help to enable them to invest, to improve their efficiency and their production of sugar. And when there's no incentive to do that, and also when there's no guarantees at the end of the day, then that's a very hard business decision to take.
Let me clarify something. If the waiver no longer exists and the tariff is applied to the sugar that is coming in from outside of CARICOM, would we still be able to compete?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah?
Definitely.
It would level the playing field. So you're not saying block them, you're saying apply the tariffs as set out under the CSME, and we now are in a fair ballgame.
Remember, there are 4 industries competing against each other in the CARICOM. Those industries the tariff would not apply to. So you're not saying automatically the sugar price goes up by 40%. You're saying that those 4 industries have a chance to compete with each other to supply the sugar. Now, if somebody does want a specialty sugar for whatever reason, fine, but pay the CET. That's what would happen in any other region. It's only where there's this anomaly. Now, what our recent report that we'll be publishing soon says is that if somebody does need a lower colour, and there's a legitimate rationale for that, there are very straightforward ways of doing that by basically melting, say, plantation white sugar and reducing the coloration a little bit more and putting it into your process. In fact, most industrial users, the big ones, the drinks companies, they melt the sugar anyway. So the other thing we're pointing out is the utilization cost of imported refined sugar, even though it doesn't pay the CET. It probably still comes out at a similar level to the CET by the time you've paid for import, storage, foreign exchange, melting that sugar, doing all of those things. There's a lot of benefits to utilizing your own regional sugar.
Clearly, because you're at the point where you're bringing this issue to the media. You've had engagements at CARICOM Secretariat level.
Oh yes, we have been.
What are we hearing? What are you hearing
Right now,
from
they're
that?
they are now conducting a special study, and we're hoping that the gentleman who has been assigned to do it will be coming to Belize to see what Belize is offering, to see that the plantation-wide, the quality sugar that we are producing in the region can be used by the manufacturers. As Mac is pointing out, a lot of other countries do the same thing. Mexico uses a lot of that sugar in their production, and they are the largest producer of soft drinks in the world. Mexico. Yeah.
Wow.
So the problem that we have is just to convince the users and to get the government to facilitate this kind of relationship. That's, we're engaging in the discussions to make sure that we get to the stage where we can really have something that is beneficial to both the user, the consumer, and importantly the guy who produces, the one who has invested the millions in a mill and all the other things. The other thing that we are pushing to is what we call branding of the sugar. When your sugar goes to England, how many people know it comes from Belize? One of the earliest brand of sugar was Demerara. Where's Demerara sugar supposed to come from? Guyana. Do you know that it's an international brand out there now, but Guyana doesn't own it because Guyana has allowed it to be used. So you have Demerara sugar in the UK, in the US, over the place you see Demerara sugar. We're saying, no, that's our intellectual property. You can't get it anymore. That's what is gone. So you have to look at what else. The important thing, you must diversify. So you can produce all kinds of sugar,
Yeah.
right? And you offer the people the choice of, I want soft sugar, I want hard sugar. The investments that Belize will make, some of the investment being made in Jamaica now, is to provide that variety. So you go into the supermarket and you have a variety of choices there. I go into Grand Cayman. You know where I saw sugar coming from? Zambia,
My word.
Africa.
Yes.
Zambia. So because they have no limit, they can buy it, and a lot of sugar from America, different brands, are on the shelves. So there are opportunities
Yes.
there. It's just that we have not maximized on it, and we are now being forced. But if you can't sell the basics in your own backyard,
Yeah.
you're going to have problem having money to invest, to ship to Canada or anywhere else in the region. Our thing is, give us the market. Protect the market like everybody else. We're not asking you to do what other people don't do. Protect the market. We then will make sure that we get to where we are providing the sugar that is needed, and that you can have it as you need it. We can have a payment schedule that is, admirable for the buyer. And we know for sure that when we produce our 450,000 tons of sugar, there's a market right around us for it.
We're not hanging about. We're making the investment. We're
That's
doing
it.
it.
And that was going to be my question. We know locally that ASR has made quite a bit of investment in being able to move beyond just the sugar that was being produced before. We're looking at direct consumption sugar, and now you're talking about a new investment as well. Looking long term, are you now perhaps planning ahead in being able to provide the industrial grade that is being demanded in Carriacou?
It's a good question, Marlene. Yeah, I mean, look, like any investment, there needs to be a market for that investment. And at the moment, the problem we have is the regulatory environment won't support the kind of investments needed. But to answer your question, I think a number of industries across the region would be very prepared to produce the genuine article for whatever people need. Now, the question is, at the moment, because the market's broken, we don't even know what the genuine figures are, because people will say, well, I just want this basically because it's a cheaper price, not because of, well, that's not the same for everyone. There are genuine requirements. And yes, the onus is on us as industries to be able to produce what the region needs. I agree with that. We're putting the money in, we're going to make it happen. And what we want to do at the end of the day is put it on the table of the policymakers in COTED and say, do you support the single market or do you not support the single market?
What's the engagement of the governments?
He mentioned, for instance, the Minister of Agriculture in Jamaica, very strong in insisting that COTED does what it needs to do. But we have to keep on putting the fire under them to get, otherwise it drags out. We're hoping at this stage now that we would have had a decision taken. 40% CET, you use what is produced in the region, and we keep on, tweaking as we go along. But we're not there yet. We don't have any protection. The studies now, another study is being done.
Is there a timeline for this study?
Yes, I say that it's supposed to be finished by the end of this month.
They say that's real Caribbean talk.
I've seen a lot of different timelines. From a Belizean perspective, we're grateful the Prime Minister's raised this issue at the head of government level. And we are working closely with the government to ensure that we need to do our bit. But at the end of the day, this is a treaty issue. This is a policy issue, and therefore all of our governments need to provide unfettered support to our cause in order to progress this issue. Because otherwise, there is a great risk of delay, of procrastination on decision making, which will have a damaging impact on all of our sugar industries. And obviously in a Belizean context, I'm sure the same for Jamaica. Remember, the value of the sugar produced here is shared directly with the farmers who work hard to produce that sugar cane. This, is a socio-economic issue. It's not simply a business issue. It's supporting somewhere around 15% of the livelihoods of Belizeans. And it's producing something like with Santander now, over 20% of the electricity that this country uses.
Right. That's another thing.
So this issue can't be divorced from the national economy, from the socio-economic situation, particularly in the north of Belize.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think that's why the government takes this very seriously, and we're grateful for the support. We all have to push ahead now and make sure that we get it over the line.
Excellent.
I'm also, as chairman of SAC, I would like to congratulate the Belizean country. When I hear of what's happening with the investment for your port to export sugar, I know for years it took so long to put together a cargo because of the trust. And the Santander guys were advising us of what they have done, and I'm now told that you can also ship bananas so there.
It's a big creek.
It's excellent. And for BSI, the cost of shipping will be less because you can ship a larger cargo each time. It's a great development.
We have to try that, Carl.
That's right. That's right.
But I think what's concerning to me is there's a level of doublespeak that takes place, not with you, but just when we talk from a regional perspective. We're encouraging businesses, entrepreneurs to look at moving into a Caribbean market and seeing and working towards the single market that we've long said can happen. But now we have a practical example here that for some reason or another has failed us. We're brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, and we're not supporting each other for some reason. And I appreciate that the governments are on board, but I want to ask, because you've obviously been in the thick of things, how optimistic are you that we are going to become reliant within this region on our own locally produced, regionally produced sugar?
Extremely optimistic. We are going to get there. There's no question about that. And you know why? Because we have no choice. So we will get to that position, one way or the other. And, watch this space. We're sitting here in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, I don't know. We'll be saying, well, here we are.
Wind farmers will be here before that comes in.
Sure they will. Well, and quite rightly. Yes. No, honestly, look, a sugar crystal is a sugar crystal at the end of the day, okay? Yeah. And basically, we produce a lot of them here in the CARICOM. We have a market, and we have some very sensible, serious industrial users who would prefer to use that as well. So there's a real win-win here in the offing. And to your point, Marlene, it can be rather complicated sometimes, particularly where you can actually get, you think you can anyway, get economic advantage from importing from outside the region. But as we know, this is a cyclical industry. Price goes up and down. It's very low right now. It will be high again. And at a certain point, it's in the interest of industrial users to strike a deal and say, look, you guys are covering your investment. We have long-term deals. It makes sense for us as well as for you. And we're giving all the evidence and the information of that. So. I think what we're trying to do, Carl, I think, is demystify this whole thing. It's not so complicated. It really isn't.
Well, when Jamaica, as I indicated earlier, Jamaica, Guyana had the largest quota, then Jamaica. So to make sure that we deliver, because if you don't deliver your quota, 1-2 years, you could lose it.
Yes.
At that time, it was the biggest market. We used to export our sugar, and I used to buy sugar from Belize. And Belize would put on the CET, not necessarily fully, it was 40%. So when I called the guys and they said, okay, this is the price. And when I check it, it was like you put on a 35%. But we were prepared to pay it because we are in the region. I used to buy the same thing from Guyana. And Guyana would put on maybe 34, 30. So the principle that he's talking about, the market here that has to be supplied, there is a competition for it once you protect it for the people in the region. So I could have bought sugar from Colombia, but that's not the spirit. The spirit is to support Caribbean. And we're trying to see if we can get the succeeding generation, like Mac, succeeding generation, to recognize the value to the sugar industry.
Yeah, yeah.
of protecting it for the country.
Yes.
And all the people who have come out of sugar, have regretted that they have come out of sugar because they have not replaced it with anything anywhere near sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You may have a different kind of employment, but the kind of contribution, not there yet.
No, it's a great crop.
It's a great
And
crop.
It's, and it,
Well, please do keep us updated, and thank you for coming in and shedding some light as to the situation that is ongoing.
Thanks for the opportunity this morning here, because we normally have a release at the end of the meetings.
Yeah.
You'll get ours. We'll make sure you get.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks
you very much.
to both of you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, after the break, we'll continue the conversation with Caribbean relations as we're joined by the High Commissioner of Jamaica to Belize in the second segment. So please stay tuned.